Hello everyone, this is an introductory Rhino tutorial going over the basics for Rhino 3D. Rhino 7 is what I am using. So when you open Rhino on a Mac, it looks something like this. Normally on the left hand side you'll see the command bar up here and different icons that help you to create or start different commands. Below that are the snaps, meaning as I'm drawing in Rhino what I want my different lines or points or polylines or objects to snap to as I'm drawing or moving. Up at the top are different snap settings to help you while you're drawing. So normally I like to have ortho turned on. You can click the button to turn something on or off. When it's highlighted like this in gray, it's on. When it's not, it's off. I also like having Smart Track and Gumball on. Alternatively, you can type the words by, if I type Gumball, notice on the left as I'm typing, it starts to give me a suggestion of what I might want to do. And if I want to turn Gumball on and off, I can hit enter, and it says Gumball is on. If I hit F and enter, it'll turn it off. Notice at the top up here, it de-highlighted, so if I want to highlight it again, now Gumball will be on. These are just some helpful snaps to have on up at the top to help me when I'm drawing. On the right hand side I typically have the properties viewport open as well as the layer panel open, and this looks pretty much like what it looks like when you open Rhino 7 for the first time. In the middle are the different viewports, and it typically defaults when you start a new file or to have all 4 of these standard views set. If you double click on the name, what it does is it opens that viewport full screen. If I double click on it again, it opens back to whatever the previous setting was, in this case all 4. If I click once, I'm actually modeling or working inside of a different viewport. Notice that the name highlights a color when I'm working in the viewports. For me, normally I like working in perspective view or a 3D view while I'm modeling, although it's helpful to sometimes toggle back and forth between some of the other 2D views just to make sure I'm aligning with certain things or have things in the correct plane. But generally speaking, I'm modeling in perspective view. So I'm going to double click on that to enlarge it. A couple quick settings that I like to work with. You'll notice that the grid that you see in these other viewports is not on. I don't like working with a grid, so if you prefer to work with one, you can leave it on. Otherwise, type grid, hit enter, and then if you scroll down, you can just toggle the grid on and off by clicking the checkbox. I'm going to just turn it off. I don't like using a grid myself. I'm going to hit escape to get out of the grid command. Another thing that I have set up on my Mac is mouse settings. So if I type options, hit enter, brings up just different preferences for Rhino. Under mouse, a setting I like to change from the default is the middle mouse button setting. For me, I like to be able to pan using my scroll wheel. So that's on my mouse. I don't have a middle button. I have a scroll wheel. So I like just setting it. I think it might default to pop-up menu. I don't really use that. I like just being able to pan with the scroll wheel. It's similar to how I use AutoCAD, which is why I set it this way. So if you like the idea of being able to pan, meaning you can move horizontally or vertically, just select pan. And that's the only thing I change here. I'm going to go back. Another thing you can change that could be helpful is just viewport colors. Like, I don't mind the gray background that Rhino defaults to. If you prefer working with like a higher contrast, meaning like a black background or a white background, you can change kind of the settings of different things like the object's selection color. You could change, if you didn't want it to be yellow, you could change it. Maybe we want it to be red, apply. And then, so when I click on an object, it turns it red instead of yellow. If I type options again, enter, maybe I want to change my background color to be a little darker. You can do that. I'm going to leave it on light gray and hit apply, and then I might change this. Just used to looking at it, maybe I'll just change it to a slightly darker yellow. Hit apply, and then Okay, so now when I have something selected, notice that it changes that yellow color, and then my background is a grayish color. So those are kind of the settings that I normally use with Rhino. And similar to how we've been learning about line, plane, and volume in Studio, line planes and volumes as well as points are big parts of Rhino modeling. And so basically, when drawing, you're going to be using lines a lot of the time. And if you have your settings set to be perpendicular and ortho and on ortho, that's probably really good for this exercise. You're going to be snapping either, at 90 degrees in any case. So if I type, I can either select the polyline command, or I can start typing polyline and hit enter. And I just click and I move my mouse in a certain direction, and I type in a number, which is 12, and then click to complete that line. And I can continue doing that until I have a 12-inch by 12-inch by 12-inch polyline. And now notice this last one, it's giving me hints about what I want to snap to. That's because I have that smart tracking on, so you can kind of see the line, that really light gray line, it's probably a little hard to see, suggesting going to that point, and then when the point appears, it's telling me that I'm snapping to it. So now I have a polyline that I've just drawn. To turn this polyline into a plane, I'm going to copy it. So I type CO, and it starts to copy. And then I'm going to click, and I'm going to move my mouse in a certain direction, and I'm just going to move it 12 inches. Maybe I'll move it. Oops. Move. Sorry about that. Copy. COPY. Enter. And then I'm going to click and move in a direction. I'm just going to move it, let's say, 24 inches away, and then click to complete the command and escape. One thing you might want to check before you start this, I set my file was set up previously, but one thing you might want to check if you're making a new file is the units. So type units, enter before we get too far. Make sure that your model units are set to inches if you didn't select that when you made a new file. Okay, so that's here where you change it. If it's set on something else, just make sure you're working in inches, since we're going to be modeling we're modeling cubes in inches. Okay, so now I've made a copy of that line. If I want to turn it into a plane, I select it and I type planar surf, PLA, and it starts to pop up, and I hit enter. And then now notice I have a surface that I created from that polyline. And if I click just on the edge, notice that it's giving me an option now. Do I want to select the curve that I just made the surface from, or do I want to select the surface? I'm going to select the curve and then just delete it because I don't need it anymore. But now I have a planar surface. I can move that by either clicking with gumball on. I can click and drag. I'm clicking with the left mouse button and holding, and I can move it. I'm going to undo that. If I click the little red arrow, if I have the object selected and I click this, I can tell it how far I want it to move in a direction. So maybe I want to move it 4 inches away, and I type a number and hit enter. I can move it in a different direction. Again, like it's already remembering that I moved it 4 last time, so it's suggesting 4, but maybe I want to move it 2, so I hit 2 and then enter. You can move it vertically by clicking on the blue arrow and a certain amount. Another way you can move something is to select the object and then type move, and then click on a point, and then move it and snap it to another point. So that's useful if you want two things to be touching. Sometimes, using the gumball is effective and quick. I'm used to it, but you can also move by typing move and then just clicking in any random direction you want, and any unspecified distance. I think normally when you're modeling in a more technical way where you want dimensions to be correct, so moving something by points and then typing in a dimension could be helpful, or using the gumball and typing in a certain dimension. The gumball being this little thing that pops up. So I'm just going to move it back a few more inches away. To make a volume, I'm going to copy, COPY, I'm going to copy that same polyline, and then hit enter to or escape to finish the command. And then I'm going to select the line and I'm going to type extrude curve, meaning I'm going to extrude it in a certain direction. I'm going to hit enter. And now notice if I move my mouse up or down, it's letting me extrude that curve perpendicularly downward or upward. And notice as I'm doing that, it looks like this sort of tube is appearing. It's like a hollow tube. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to just type in 12 and then hit enter, and now it's extruded this hollow cylinder 12 inches. I don't really want a hollow cylinder. Normally when I'm 3D modeling, I like kind of using solid closed volumes because these paper thin tubes aren't realistic, I guess, in a way, of anything I'd be modeling in real life. Everything has a thickness to it, and this is like razor thin. So I'm going to copy that again and show you how to make a solid cube. So copy, I'm just going to move it over here, and then hit escape to finish. I'm going to select that curve again. I'm going to type extrude curve again. And before I click or type in a dimension, I'm going to make sure that it's solid. You can either click the checkbox, or if you type S, see how that S is underlined? That tells you, like, if you want to use a key command and type S, enter, it's now going to make a solid box. So notice that if I hit S, enter again, I'll show you. So notice with solid deselected, notice that I'm getting that hollow tube effect. With S selected, or solid selected, notice over here, notice it's kind of subtle, but notice now that I have like a solid top and bottom to that, and I can see that because there's like that cross line and that cross line there. So I'm going to type in 12 again, and then now I have a solid cube that's showing. One thing I don't think I specified very clearly when I started this that you might want to set up, if you have not set up your Rhino this way, I like working with a shaded view. I think Rhino defaults maybe to wireframe if you're making a new file or you don't have something set previously, but wireframe lets me see through objects to infinity. And so like how I can see like kind of through this cube, I see this top edge here, but I also see that back edge. I think that's fine initially, but then like as I am modeling something more complex, I personally find it to become very complicated quickly. So I like working in a shaded view because what that does is it gives me sort of just the solid faces, so I can't like have X-ray vision, and I find that easier to model. There are times where I might toggle on and off because sometimes having the ability to see through things can be really helpful when you're trying to snap to things through things, but generally speaking I like working in the shaded view. So just to recap, that's polyline. To make a surface out of it, the command is select the polyline, type planar surf. To make a 3D volume, select the polyline and type extrude curve, and just make sure that is set to solid, and that's how you make sort of lines, planes, and volumes. If you wanted to make points, you can type point, or you can select the point, and you can click anywhere, maybe clicking the end. There's already a point there in space, so if I wanted to put a point somewhere else along a line or on a surface, the point command could be useful if you're, trying to snap to things that aren't necessarily already set up in your space. So I could snap to that point and draw a line and connect to another point if I wanted to make something that wasn't quite, a perpendicular thing, or if you're trying to like do sort of geometry that's not exactly orthogonal. But generally speaking, I find myself using polylines and volumes or extruded curves. So all of these things, I'm just been drawing on the default layer, which is generally speaking how I like to model. I like having everything kind of starting off on a default layer. I'm going to select these things. So I'm going to select those two by like clicking, holding my mouse, and dragging over them. And then if I want to add this curve because I didn't quite get it, I can hold Shift, and now all of them are selected. And I just want to move these to a layer and turn them off because I'm not really going to work with them right now. So let me just, I don't think I have anything on layer 4. So I'm going to, under the Properties window, I'm going to select the layer 4, and then notice they turn green, which is the color of this layer. And I'm just going to turn it off because I don't like seeing them. If you want to rename your layers, you can by double-clicking. I'm just going to leave it as layer 4 for now. It's good to be organized. I think for this, I'm just going to be a little unorganized. And so again, if I'm pressing my middle mouse button to pan, there's a hand button up here if you want to pan without using the middle mouse. You can always select that. And then I'm right-clicking to orbit, just as a reminder if you haven't explored with Rhino a lot. So what you're looking at here, I've just modeled some kind of basic, maybe not the greatest, line, plane, and volume cubes. I'm going to show you a couple quick things to show you how I modeled some of these. So to model the volume cube, for example, I start with a polyline, and I was just I click, type a dimension, so 12. If this is a 12-inch cube, yours, make sure you use the measurements of what we modeled in the fall semester. But so I made a just a 12-inch cube to start, and then I typed extrude curve, again making sure that solid is selected, and I typed 12 again. And then in this case, my volume cube, I had like this nugget here that was subtracted out of my volume cube, so I modeled that by, let's say it was 4-inch cube potentially, by, let's say it's let's do something a little different. Let's say it's a 4-inch cube, 4, and then let's say, so 4 inches that way, 8 inches that way, and then I'm going to complete that, type extrude curve, and I'm going to extrude that, let's say it was another 4 inches. And I'm going to move this, so I'm going to type move, and I'm going to actually snap to the top corner to this top corner. And notice I left behind that curve that I drew on the ground, so I can just delete that if I don't want it. But I want to subtract this out of this cube. So let me move this out of the way so you can see it and do it a little better. I want to subtract this small cube from the big cube. So I'm going to use my what are called Boolean commands. And so right now the Boolean union is the only one that's showing up on my display. You might have more shown up. If you don't, if you right-click and hold for a little bit longer, it opens up all these other solid tools. I really am only going to use a couple of these today, but just know there are lots of different options. But for basic Rhino, we're just going to start with this. So I'm going to use the Boolean difference command, which if you hover over a button, it tells you what it's doing. So I'm going to use the Boolean difference command. I'm going to select it, and now Rhino is asking me what I want to do. So select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract from. So I want to subtract from this one, and I'm going to hit enter, and then subtract surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract with. And so I want to get rid of this chunk out of this cube. So I'm going to select this one, and then notice that delete input is selected for me. That means I want to delete that little chunk after I've deleted it from the bigger volume. So if I'm done, so I'm going to hit enter, and then now notice that that little rectangular piece deleted, and it's now also deleted out of my cube. I'm going to undo that for a second. So if I wanted to keep this little guy, I could by doing the same thing. So I'm going to select the difference command. I'm going to select my big cube and hit enter. Then I'm going to select my small cube, but before I hit enter again, I'm just going to uncheck delete input and hit enter. Let me show you what that does. So now what it's done, I'm just going to drag that out of the way. Now it's subtracted it from the cube, but it left me this piece. And so maybe this chunk actually lives on my cube somewhere. Maybe I subtracted it, but then it shows up later. So if I'll show you, if I'm going to move that, type move, let's just snap it to that point. But maybe in my cube that I modeled last semester, maybe it was on this cube, but it was rotated. So the gumball is useful for moving things in certain dimensions. So I could click this red arrow and tell it to move it 4 inches to the right. I could move it 2 inches a different direction. I could move it 2 inches. I could move it down by typing a minus dimension. But I can also rotate it. So I'll show you that by zooming out a little bit. So if I select this, and orbit around it, you can kind of see these little like curved lines. It's suggesting like, do you want to rotate it which direction? So I'm going to select the blue one because I want to rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise. So I'm going to say rotate around the z-axis, let's say 90. So now that rotated that. I can also rotate by typing rotate. So enter, rotate, and then click a point. Click the other point of the line that you want to rotate, and then move your mouse in the direction you want to rotate. So, but the gumball is a helpful way. I can rotate it around any axis. And you can rotate by something other than 90 degrees. I just know that my cube has got a lot of 90-degree angles, but just so you know, you can rotate by like weird numbers or 45-degree angles as well. So basically, I did a very dumb volume cube. Yours are probably much better, but I subtracted some shapes, some volumes out of that cube, and maybe you need to add some shapes. I'll show you that. So I'm going to just move this little nub, and I'm going to snap to there. Maybe my volume cube looked something, maybe it was a little better than that. Maybe it's something like that. So maybe I want to combine these shapes now so that they're joined together. So this, I'm going to use the Boolean union command. So Boolean union is this one here, or it's just the one that's appearing over here. So I'm going to select that, and now it's asking me select surfaces to union. So I'm going to select that one, hit enter. I'm going to select them both rather, and then hit enter. So Boolean union, select them both, and hit enter. And now they're joined together as one. So maybe that's my volume cube. For the plane cube, I'm going to delete that curve. So the plane cube, this one, I move these over out of the way so you can see this. And move my lines this way too, just to get them out of the view. So for the plane cube, I modeled it in a pretty similar way to the volume cube by starting by drawing some polylines. And typing in numbers, 12 by 12 by 12, but again, I want to like have it help me find that. You could also just type in the math. But I'm going to give these planes some thickness. I couldn't really remember how thick they were, so I'm just going to extrude it by typing extrude curve. I'm going to extrude by 3/8 of an inch and hit enter. And again, making sure that solid is selected so that I don't have like tube. So now I have this plane, and basically I can copy this. Let's copy this plane, and let's say I actually want to rotate that plane. I can click the gumball, type in 90, and rotate it 90 degrees, and then maybe I want to move it. Maybe it needs to be, I don't know, somewhere. We can snap to. Let's see, what do I have set? I have an end point. Let's see what my snaps are. Midpoint, so I should be able to snap, there we go, to the midpoint of that line, an end point of a line. Normally I have like end point, midpoint, and perpendicular selected. You can do other ones, but generally I think these are like what I'm using for the plane cube anyway. I'm going to close my solid tools window. One thing that could be useful in modeling the plane cube is like scaling, and you can scale in one direction in Rhino by typing in scale 1D, hitting enter. But for this, I'm going to tell it I want to scale. Let's say I want to like shrink this plane because maybe this vertical plane doesn't go that tall. So I click the end, and then I click the end of that line as well. So I click the base point, and then I go up, and then now it's asking how tall do you want that line actually to be. And I'm going to type in a dimension, or I can click anywhere I want. But I know that that plane is 8 inches tall in my cube, so I'm going to type in 8 and then hit enter. And then now it's made that plane smaller. I can scale in 1D a different way too, by typing scale 1D again. And then let's say I want to shrink this thing this way. So if I click here, I click the point that I want to shorten, and then I'm going to tell it, maybe I know that in my model it's 6 inches. So then I type 6, and then now I have a plane that's 6 inches. If you do scale 2D, I'll show you that. Let me just copy this over. if you scale this in 2 dimensions by just typing scale 2D, you'll see that it's asking for a similar thing, but what it does is it will scale like the thickness to match the length. And in this case, all of my planes were the same thickness, so I don't really want that thing to be scaling that way. So scale 1D is definitely a good thing. If you haven't saved at this point, make sure you do that. Rhino will automatically save for you along the way, but just make sure you save it when you start. I did not say that, but I'm realizing I should have said that in the beginning. So I made the line cubes in a similar way, where I first drew out a square. In this case, I'm just going to do 3/8. Let's say that's what it was in the final. I think it was 3/8 of an inch. So 3/8, and I click, and then I do 3/8, and I click, and then do it again, 3/8, and then zoom in, select that point. Now I have that same thing where I have a curve, and I'm going to extrude it by typing extrude curve. Now I'm going to extrude it 12 inches again. And so now I have this line, and I ended up just kind of copying this line around to make my line cube. If you did shorter sticks, some students were allowed to use short sticks, some had to just use the full length. You might use the scale 1D here as well, so if you needed a stick that was 9 inches, you could do the same thing where you scale a point and then click, click an endpoint, and then you tell it, okay, I actually need this stick to be 8 inches, and then enter, and it'll make that for you. For this, I haven't done this yet for this cube, but once you have your cube modeled, one thing I would do is Boolean union the pieces. So you select Boolean, you select Boolean union, select surfaces or poly surfaces to union. Maybe you click these 3 and hit enter, and notice now it's joined them together. So you can select all of them and Boolean union them together, and now it makes one sort of combined shape, although that one must not be touching because it didn't combine it. But in any case, you want to union them all together so it's one shape that you can move around. So that's the first part of the exercise, is modeling the line plane going